So Derek, here's a microphone too. If you
Yeah, I might
usually
try that
helps.
out.
Hopefully this will work.
Yeah.
So Derek will show you some work, describe it.
All right. It's going to take a half an hour, and I'm going to pump about 200 hours of entertainment into this half hour.
You can go up to the end of class if you want.
Yeah, so right off the bat, we just got out of the good time movement idea, and I was thinking about welding and how welders practically are more light artists than any other person because they have to block out the light. They deal with so much light. So I'm going to start slowly, show you some pictures. Just roll right through a progression of art that I've created. Here's Bertoia columns. Bertoia was Harry Bertoia, a guy back when the Eames were making chairs. He was making chairs too. He also made art.
Hold on a second, Derek. Can you guys hear him okay? Yeah. Okay, sorry.
He made these columns and they resonate when wind hits them. So I started doing that too, and I'll come back to us when I show you them when they're electrified. Here's a lot of resin art. You can buy a polymer composite that's just clear goop, probably poisonous, but if you do it right, you can make these kind of crystalline structures, embed anything in it if it's reflective or not. You can also notice there's some metal art in the background that's like metal found stencils. All right, this is me wearing my welding gear right after I finish this rack, and you'll see this on performance when I'm doing something kind of strange in a little bit. Here's a light synthesizer. It's just a bunch of motors, and you might not be able to see, but on the front of each motor is a spinning copper cog that causes a little bit of a flicker. Each one's like a different flower, different amount of petals, 4 petals up to 30 petals. And so in one rotation, all of those different petals will cause different frequencies of pulse width. But anyway, it's kind of like a cross between an electronic music synthesizer, but it allows you to, as you place patch cords between motors, it allows you to see the speed of the light that's slowly kind of falling apart as more motors are kind of collectively choosing the speed of the light. You might have seen those a second ago. That's the kind of thing I bring into class and show you what reflection happens. But those are speaker grills, and computers all need those so that ventilation happens. And it's just a side effect that sometimes Hewlett-Packard makes an interesting little mandala. Just looking at physics books, you'll see stuff like this, wind generation motifs, and that's my inspiration. You'll see why. Here's some lamp art. Just found this in a dumpster, just like an aluminum 5-light system. Long wires down those tubes in the background. But then I just took some cantaloupe trays and stenciled them out with color and holes, and made a really cool lamp for a while. These are logic rules for these like circuit boards I made that create those pictures. And you'll see those pictures in a movie in a little bit. This is a chroma print. It's a bootleg mixture of about 5 chroma prints from an artist named Victor Moscoso. I'll show you that animated. Here's a lot of circuit boards that I produced to do animations. You'll see this maybe. Here's a photo stencil with found objects. So if you put that on a photo emulsion screen print exposure unit, you'll get those objects. You'll get the negative space of them. Here's that all those circuit boards with the logic rules around a table. That's a board game. And here's a close-up on it. Lots of lights. Lots of lights. That's the LEDs. And these are slight sculpture too, but these are the player characters that you roll around the table. And they're conductively padded so that their movement creates the light. This is a random dice number generator. Here's a close-up. Now this is the thing I wear on my feet when I'm on that big podium thing. You'll see that in a bit. Here's light art. It's kind of like one of those Bertoia columns. This is a fabricated picture. But you play that big light board. Each one of those has an LED behind it, and you play each one is hand wired meticulously to that little console panel with just resin and wire. Here's another one of those photo prints. And that's the lamp without the gels. There's screen printing if you didn't know. That stencil right there, it could have been actual objects that were placed on the photo emulsion, and then once you expose it, then those objects become your art. And here's that print with the cog. You can kind of discern it. It's a close-up of a decent representation of resin doing some cool reflection. You can buy from 3M some retroflective material that's ASTM safe for people that are working in the safety industry. But cut it up, make art from it. Here's an old lamp I made out of a shower curtain and a bunch of just leftover vinyl. Leftover. One of my favorite materials is just colored plastic folders that you can get at office stores. Now this is a strange picture because he's wearing a lot of photographs, because I knit with photographic film that was left over in the CVS photo process dumpster. So if you needed to on a island, just keep busy. If you're wearing this thing, you could just unravel it and look at photos. I bet you know what this is. You can see those tuning forks. I'd zoom in, but it might just self-destruct. All right, so that's what the screen looked like. It was etched, carved, by the photo emulsion before the print went down on paper. Okay, now we're slowly speeding up. Really quick, show you some stuff in Firefox. Animated GIFs. Anybody? This is working just, I don't know if I ever named this technique, but you just take 4 pieces of paper, you cut out the exact same stencil all on the same time, just put taper on the edges, and then recombine all 4 or 3 or 5 layers into 4 or 3 or 5 prints with, combination border color transitions. It's the same exact piece of art 4 times because I made the, maybe you get it. Here's a little digital picture of color. This just connotes that color is always there, but you can change your resolution, and that resolution just could go deeper and deeper, so that you can make a picture like this that you'd have to zoom in for months to see the transition between, like, a high red and a low red. This is just a picture of like a $20 flood lamp, the ones that we have. If we wanted to, we could do screen printing with them. They just need to be about 2 feet away from the surface of the screen. Just a little quick object I made. It's a paper stencil, kind of. I just took a piece of paper and kept carving a shape in it and kept raising the shapes up so that if you looked at it from the top, it would look like the exact same original piece of paper, but it was kind of like architecturally turned into a temple. But just for no reason, I put it on a lamp, and boy, did it have a lot to say. Now, this is a special piece of art. It's in South Dakota. I went to a dump and picked up a, like YMCA scoreboard for some sports, and then I just cut it apart. I didn't know how to weld back then, and just cut it apart and taped it together and made a quatrefoil out of it, and then connected it to a Rubbermaid tub that had a bunch of contact pickups made out of aluminum crumples in it. Put salt water in there, you release electricity in there, and you just do this with the bowl. But, you can get electrocuted. Work with low voltage, you can't get electrocuted too badly. All right, that's the still media. Here we have Open Studios last year, fall. I made a pinball table that had light-carrying copper or steer wool bearings on it. And those are all the brads you might have seen around the art room. It's a little bit of technology to get it to work, but not too much, actually. Oh, there's probably more stuff at that same show. Gotta be methodical. I think if I ever had to have a profession, I'd choose VJing, because it's just really experimental light art every night if you needed it. And you just make some light sculptures, and then you have your computer look at your light sculptures, talk about a party. So there's a setup for a VJ rig. Sometimes if I feel like it's appropriate, just facilitate art and have a VJ rig in the corner of an art show. Here's the table. They might get some play. They just have to roll around the sides of it to affect it. And you can get all the different shapes. Yeah, it'd be nice to just see it, you know, transition. All the diodes on the walls of this piece of art are controlling, collectively controlling the lights. Here's a fun little Wheel of Fortune showcase showdown kind of thing. You just spin it, and there's just all these copper tabs that are hitting against a piece of open steel wool. And whichever light is connected to that tab is the one that goes on. So it's pretty much whatever's right in front of your face is where the light's at. Really great VJing tool, because you always need stencils and masks to mix video. And you'd be amazed, like a small thing, you know, each one of those objects is only a square inch, but put it on a screen, changes the dimension. This is an interesting piece of you know, kind of acoustic art. There's no electricity involved, really. Just a bunch of vinyl that's hand sewn with a bunch of Fresnel lenses from overhead projectors at all those intervals. And when you go underneath it and look at the sun through it, it's kind of weird. Maybe we'll get that chance. Take it to the end where I really exploit the possibility. It's kind of fun to put up an art show, and then one of the things you have to make sure of is, like, I'm not going to set a fire on, because, you know, light art can set fires on. But you have a focal point, and the focal point for most of these is just like 3 or 4 feet. Keep it in the air; it's not going to hit the grass. All right, I'll change it up a little bit. I'm a sculptor by trade, I guess, and just a little commission. You know, everyone wants to have their own little Halloween get-up at their house, so sometimes you can just form a mask that has a specific, you know, texture that will accommodate a projection of a face or a projection of anything. A couple of artists made it big by just projecting people's bodies on marionettes of sorts. So here's just a remake of the thing that they have at the Disney Funhouse, I guess. But this video, compared to the rest, is one that you can't really see on video because you can't really discern texture as well. All right, this is a bunch of mirrors that are resined to a steel drum that's on a bearing from a wheelbarrow. And as you can see, that trash can and that tree are highly interesting compared to the normal depiction of a trash can in a tree. Sometimes corporate offices go under, and they have all this stuff that they need to move. And, you know, it's a stencil piece of art. These giant hamster wheels, for no apparent reason, you know, leave interesting shadows. I'd say that mirror piece left far more interesting shadows because, you know, mirrors are 90-something%. Yeah, mostly Dell. Here's the pregame show for that art show, just sampling out the various objects that have the potential to, you know, afford people expression. Because interactive art's kind of where it's at. Now, you might get a chance to see not only the movement of the lights, characters around the board, but you might get to see the die roll. The die roll is this hidden board. It has about 40 different directions, and then a copper tab spinning around it. You can see the arrow right there. And so you make a motor run, and it's sort of like a random number generator, and it might, there it is. You really don't know where it's going to land, and it's going to usually land somewhere. Sometimes it might hit a crevice between like the 2 conductive zones, but you know, a lot of people here in the computer science department, they're looking for a randomness, but you can just use a motor and you know, it's just a spin the wheel device on like Spin Bottle or like early board games. You know, it's nothing more than the wind. Here is the chroma prints in action. One piece of paper exposed to, in this case, 4 different colors of light. Perhaps only 3 of them are actually interesting. But you can see that 2 different pictures are interwoven and kind of decode based on which light they're presented with. So just for fun, check out this hallway of the prints. I think I did a run of like 50 or 60. So it's light blue, dark blue as the composite, and then red as the other. So like, you know, red's kind of like the toenails of one, light blue is the toenails of the other, and then dark blue is the central color, and then yellow is just the easiest color to use as a backdrop. Okay, this just inadvertently happened to be light art. I think it was supposed to, it was slated as a sound art event. But you know, in some cases, when you put angle grinders on your feet and you're playing xylophones, you know, you're making lots of light, and it's kind of cool. You know, sometimes the light's a little bit intense for people. So now we get into iTunes, the last video montage. If I had a favorite artist, I'd probably have to say Man Ray. This is a Man Ray movie. People had a riot in the movie theater when they had to see this. Some guy said, "It hurts my eyes." The other guy said, "Why don't you go see a doctor?" That's salt, perhaps. Here's the Man Ray movie put through just a hue rearranger. You can think of grayscale as a number between 0 and 256, perhaps. Why not replace that with just any hue of, or any spectrum of color? It's really quite arbitrary. This is just live feedback. If you point, just like you can use a Xerox machine to get a couple of frames per minute, you can use live video to get 30 frames per minute, and that's pretty fast. So just, in particular, this camera has a flip on it so that you're actually seeing the right side reversed on the left side. And in that particular mode, it offers some good Fibonacci sequence stuff. And it's all about the angle of the original camera versus the projection screen. That ratio predicts how many times it's going to fold and twist and stuff. You know, it's kind of like math. Sometimes you don't even need a flashlight, and there's enough light from the projector making light to be that is projected by, or is re-energized by the camera, that you can just make a loop that sustains itself. So you can get kind of like a standing waveform, which is a cool concept. I'd say I'm more of a particle artist than a light artist, but since light is a particle, at least half the time, it overlaps. Here's just kind of like a particle system. You can think of it as a, you know, water that can't really reflect, but it stops once it needs to reflect. So I did lots of studies with this. It's just touching the computer, you know, tap, tap, tap to sending off new points. So this is something done in non-real time. You just get a video, and then you want to make it so that there's a feedback effect. So it's actually just a simple little computer program that says, put 97% of the previous frame in with the next frame, and then just keep a loop of that. Keep the old information alive. And again, you get some standing forms, kind of like a collective shadow of the dancer. Kind of neat. She might be painting with light, but herself as like the opaque core of the light is kind of being etched in shadow. Another one of these, you can see how just changing where the clicks go changes the composition. There's probably time for two. But when you design these, it's all about the algorithm. It's like the when I touch the corner, I stop kind of thing. And then there's a running tick to expand the points. All right, this has been going on for quite well over at least 500,000 years. I don't know. Since people have had fire, they've been able to make luminaries. If it's not a pumpkin, then why not do it in ceramic? And if the DJ was ever invented, it certainly was when someone twirled a pumpkin, and just got a nice, you know, composite reflection going. This particular luminary was 2 bowls that I threw on a throwing wheel and then just topped them together into a sphere. It's a little bit oblong. This is a light record player. I guess I invented it. It's just a parallel series of copper prongs that are being exposed to a circling piece of steel. And that steel has a screen print, which is just paint, which in particular for this usage is a coating that's kind of insulative. So wherever it's touching steel, it makes light. And then the top half of the projection here is a feedback, a non-real-time computer that's saying, take the bottom row, push it up. Take the bottom row, push it up. So it keeps trailing out. And you can see perhaps a decoding of the original design, if it went well at least. A lot of computer art's based on ray tracing. That went by way too fast. Ray tracing is how we do like 3D modeling. There's an emulator of light, and it's sending all of its particles till it hits something. If it hits something, then it registers in the computer, cause like shading variables to, you know, represent a sphere or whatever you got. So here's some 2D ray tracing, just to experiment with it. You'll notice that there's a little bit of an artifact in the middle where it seems like rays just stop at the halfway point. This strange video is it's 4-dimensional space, which means it's every frame of a 7-second loop of a rotating piece of ceramic pottery is in every frame that you're seeing for 7 seconds. So you'll notice there's a jump every 7 seconds, perhaps. And that's because you have to do a very precise, almost like splicing and dicing of 7 seconds into themselves. And then you recombine to create kind of like a 4-dimensional contour of an object. So the future perhaps is 3D printing. And when I was doing ceramics for sculptural reasons, I would want to make sculptures that I could place into this algorithm to make even stranger negative spaces arise. So it's like a feedback system for my artistic process. These particular sculptures are not mine. They're from another artist that I needed to get his sculptures into this program because I mean, I can make some cups and some bowls, but he was doing some special stuff. Here's a cup sideways. So it's sort of like trailing down the cup. Think of it a little bit like an MRI. Yeah, here's a point of light program. There's old video games that make it so you can't see the bad guys in the blue. And that interests me. This is very binary, or it's like very bitwise. So all of those points on the screen are individually computed, which makes it a very processor intensive if you're gonna do a big resolution print. So if I do this program again, this program only took just one night of fiddling, you know, I would go vector, because then you could scale it up. But then you just have to change the way that you go about it. In fact, you just have to cut off the stuff in this program that's just overkill. That's just excessive. So it's got to be the algorithm's got to be smartened. Here's the same algorithm, but I released 3 different light sources on the same original stencil, which is just 4 arcs. And as they overlap, then you get the idea that like shared space, like both lights are seeing that space or not seeing that space. It can get kind of confusing, especially if I invert the field. You can never know what represents light or not. But out here, I say, okay, this is getting complicated. And then I think I just blank it and say start over. And it makes sense from here. Like if you look at it, you know where green is, you know where red is. You just follow all of the arcs back to their center. Now this one's more aesthetically played with for a while, I'm doing feedback on the drawing process itself. And then once the drawing is completed, you know, it's more like just a maze for these crawlers to use their flashlights in. Once the light's completed, then I stop with the cheesy, glitzy stuff, and then just go straight to these opaque lines. So I'll invert it, see if we can understand that character who's moving through the maze. You know, at this point, I was like, I want to see the maze, so I might have, yeah, so if I turned the maze back on. Just with some composting operations, like plus, minus stuff. The strange result of this process is the inverse of the expansion of like 1,000 lines. I think I maxed out at about 1,000 lines emanating from the centers. And once they finally get like 400 pixels outside of the center, you start seeing places like the opposite of what they can see. So you get these strange sprays, which sort of look like a magnetic field a little bit. But these travelers are kind of fun. But to realize them, you got to just do it with the right color, because I'm actually generating, am I generating light, I guess? Like the light that the individual points see from their perspective. So that one just reached out, it's kind of neat. And that one just kind of snuck through a wall with a peephole. This might be the best for the colors. So remember it might be 3 characters loose, and whenever something turns white, that might mean that all 3 of them don't see it. So if you saw the inverse of it, perhaps black is when they're all ignorant. So this quick video is it's related. It's a bunch of still photographs of my art, but then there's an equation that composts them all together based on a picture of, say, 10 different colors. Whenever there's a green, then replace it with picture A. Okay, can anyone guess what this is? This is RGB value represented as kind of like a little cluster character. Whenever whatever the color is, when the value of RGB goes up to 255, then you spatially see the progression. So this is a white, 255, 255, 255. You turn down everything but the green, and that's what spatially happens. So I called this program like color guns, and I have this idea that they would see how they have those twitchy mustaches. I thought maybe that they would transmit their color out in the direction that they're oriented towards, like the color's direction perhaps. And then they would like slowly kind of infect each other's colors and shoot out, you know, just transition between their color states in a kind of feedback way where they did it themselves, so I'm not involved. But just as a practice of visualizing computer color, I thought it was very strong, this little node. And it took a little while to get the lines to look proper. Here's it's like a biological process most closely related to like a mushroom ring, just an expansion, or like an ant ring, like they're eating color as they move out. I'll show you the opening of it again. It's kind of fun when it's moving fast. The program actually moves faster when it has less to do, because I was doing maybe a real-time recording of it. Here's those Harry Bertoia columns. This one's been electrified with a checkerboard of electricity. So you can think of all of those guys, those steel rods, as a chessboard where black is negative and white is positive. And so they need each other, those electricities. It's kind of complicated. But when they shimmer, instead of it being a piece of sound art, it's a piece of light art, which is, they canceled the sound art right out because they couldn't touch each other sonically anymore. For a while, I focused on making these little cores where you just take LEDs, put them under reflectors, and just try out different ways of controlling it with a glove that has electricity running through it, or open wires, as is the case here. There's lots of ways to do it. You could, just like welding, you can electrify your glove and affect the world, and then, you know, your touch is electricity. It's kind of fun. So this is kind of like this fun video I made of a piece of plastic with some blue water in it on a table that was like hollow with a glass plate, and then the video is from beneath, and then it's just, you know, non-real time declaring the amplitude of different like clumps of light. So it's trying really to discern where centers of power are, and it's got kind of like a self-consuming algorithm going, which just uses kind of like a division technique. Kind of like a bully that sneaks around and says, hey, where you at? All right, I'll go halfway there, but you gotta join my club. And then slowly these nodes of power develop. And the size of the circle represents how many pixels that they absorbed. Here's the same program, but running on just what was ever around. I think I experimented on one of my light grids. And then later, I started experimenting on just putting it, facing the camera from the computer at the computer screen itself. And it started to do rippling, which was cool. It's what you'd expect. Here's the camera looking at the LCD screen of the laptop. So it's self-generating percussion. At this point, I devised, you know, an algorithm that made sound, whatever sound is, that was based on the lengths of, or the amount of points and stuff. It's far too open-ended. Yeah, so it's fun to make tools that are for looking at art, and then making art based on new ways of seeing. Here's another one of those. This guy's like a core that's just a resin center, and then a bunch of nails that have been casted in a sphere, and then the light's on those nails, and then I'm wearing electrified gloves, and so just like your hands are touching it, just like those kind of like nail impression boards where you push in, but instead of pushing in with texture, you're pushing in with electricity. Yeah, so I should ask if there's any questions, because that's a very important part of my learning process. Oh, it's just a process of gleaning. Favorite little tidbits from everywhere you ever encounter. But as a collager, maybe my primary form of art is collaging, and that's just about particles. But here on campus back in like 2002, I was a computer art rat, kind of hereabouts across the way where we have our section. And so it's like 8 years out past taking classes with Elliot Anderson and the electronic music teacher Peter Elsey, and they brought me back here. So I just wanted to make sure you knew about the boomerang effect, if you keep going. Yeah? They're all done in Max MSP. Max is transmitted via patches, which are actually just Word files. So if you wanted to look at anything particular, you could email me, but my website, which is just the Denim website with the tilde DERYKE, has a programming link with fun stuff to download before I even have to tell you what's the best. You just have a bunch of stuff to look at. Thanks, Richard.
All right, thank you, Derek. There are tons of questions I have, but I guess I'll ask them later. So anyway, that's class today, I think. What time do we go to? 3:45. So continuous sections on Wednesday and Thursday. Maybe we can do some shadow puppet type stuff. And then